Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Becky Siegmeyer, and I am the Program Director for the SciTechsperience Internship Program at MHTA. I'm here today with my colleague, Kip Graham, Employer Network Manager at the Software Guild.
Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you here. This webinar is part of the SciTechsperience STEM Job Search webinar series. Kip and I are joining forces on a few different topics in this series because even though we work at different organizations, the job seekers that we work with have many of the same questions about the job search process. So we put our heads together to bring you information in a few different webinars on a couple different topics. So today we're going to be talking about interviewing strategies. We're going to cover do's and don'ts for both phone and in-person interviews, and we're really excited to share this information with you. We're confident that if you use these strategies, your anxiety will decrease and your odds of a successful outcome will increase dramatically. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions window, and our assistant Piper Cleveland will manage that for us. Before we get started, we want to take just a minute to give you a little background on our two organizations. As I mentioned, this is part of the SciTechsperience webinar series, and you may or may not be familiar with what SciTechsperience is, so I'm going to cover that just real briefly. SciTechsperience connects college STEM majors to paid internships in small for-profit Minnesota businesses. We work with hundreds of companies in science, IT, engineering, and manufacturing sectors, as well as a few others. This is a free statewide program funded by an appropriation from the Minnesota State Legislature. The program has been around since the pilot launch back in 2012, and since then we've placed almost 1,000 students in internships all across the state. In 2018 and 2019, at least 650 students are going to be hired through the program. What's really unique about SciTechsperience is that employers are provided with a cash reimbursement for 50% of their interns' wages. That's worth up to $2,500. This reimbursement serves as an incentive for these companies to hire, and maybe they're going to hire an intern when they otherwise wouldn't have, and in some cases they're going to hire more than one intern. So this is a really great place to be if you're looking for an internship. If you are pursuing an associate's, bachelor's, or master's degree in a STEM field, we can help you discover hundreds of opportunities in small companies that you may not find anywhere else. So check out our website, scitechmn.org, for more information. The enrollment form is right on the homepage. All right, Kip, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Software Guild?
Sure thing. Thank you, Becky. The Software Guild is a fast-paced, intensive boot camp to teach people how to be software developers. We take that term boot camp very seriously. It is a very intensive 12 weeks. Students are in there from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday for 12 weeks, with about 20 hours of homework on top of that. Wow. To teach them software development skills so they're ready for a junior level software development job post-graduation. Our learners are of all ages and backgrounds, and they come out getting jobs in junior Java development fields or junior C#.NET development. For more information, or if you'd like to learn more, please go to our website at thesoftwareguild.com.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Kip. Let's get started on interviewing strategies. I'd like to start off by saying that when you get to this stage of the job or internship search, give yourself a pat on the back. At this point, your communication, resume, and maybe even targeted networking has helped you get your foot in the door. So nice work. The information we're going to provide in this webinar is designed to help you survive and thrive, the part of the job search that many, if not most people, feel is the most nerve-wracking, and that's interviewing.
Absolutely.
All right, so Kip, in your role at the Software Guild, you spend a lot of time coaching students on best practices for interviewing. Let's start with the phone interview. What are some do's and don'ts that you share with people about what to do before the call? I mean, obviously there's going to be some no-brainers, but what are some of the less obvious things that people should keep in mind?
Absolutely. One of the things that you should do is absolutely put the appointment on your calendar. Be ready at the scheduled time and know who's calling whom, and make sure you have the number handy if you're calling the employer But put all this information into the calendar invite. And also, when you're creating that calendar invite, if they're sending you the calendar invite, make sure your time zone is correct in your email so
Good
that
point.
you're not accidentally on Mountain Time when you're actually in Central or something to that extent.
What a great idea to put that information right into your calendar. Basically, with a little bit of planning, you can really lower your stress level.
Yeah, absolutely. You want all that information right in front of you no matter where you go. If you're like me, your calendar's on your phone, just make it all easy on yourself, have all the information right there.
Great point. Let's talk about the next step. What do you do when the phone actually rings?
Well, the first thing to do is just take a breath and remember to breathe.
Good point.
Exhale and smile when the phone rings. It's really hard to convey enthusiasm over the phone, and if you're smiling, that's a great way to make sure that you're doing that.
It'll help you relax too.
Absolutely. Again, make sure that you're checking to see who's calling. If it's not the employer and if it's one of your friends or another contact, just let it go to voicemail and wait for the employer to call. But if it's a number you don't recognize, pick up just in case it is that employer calling from a line you didn't expect.
And is there a certain way you should answer the phone?
Absolutely. You should always say, hello, this is Kip Graham, or whatever your name is, obviously. Do not just say hello. Do not just say hey or what up. You want to be very professional about this and make sure that they know they got the right person on the line.
How does somebody stay focused?
Well, the first thing to do is do not multitask. So many people like to multitask when they're on the phone, either looking up answers or having a bunch of information in front of them. Stay focused on the conversation. It's going to make you sound a lot more engaged. Make sure to also silence your phone, close the documents on your screen, and turn off the TV or radio or any sort of noise in the background. Speaking of which, be aware of background noise. Get someplace quiet where your voice won't echo. Obviously, you don't want to be in the bathroom.
Good point.
But you also want to avoid running water, stairwells where things are kind of echoey, loud noises like traffic or other people who might be talking. Your parked car with the windows rolled up is actually a pretty good backup spot if you can't find someplace, but try to find a conference or a meeting room. And then also, again, smile while you're talking. Standing in front of a mirror will actually help you do this. Helps you remember kind of to smile while you look at yourself, and while you're smiling, you're going to sound more enthusiastic, more engaged while you're on the phone.
Oh, those are such great tips. It's so easy to get nervous and not be thinking about what is happening in the background. A friend of mine is a recruiter at a Fortune 100 company, and she told me about a time when she called someone, and when she asked the person, is this a good time? The person said yes, and then she heard the toilet flush.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so not a good way to start making your first impression.
Yeah, and I don't think most of our listeners would do anything like that, but you certainly can take a lesson from that and make sure that you're in a place with good background noises.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to how to answer questions. This is really the heart of any interview, whether it's on the phone or in person. And really providing clear, non-rambling answers is going to be the key to your success. And the strategy we recommend is something called the STAR method. So the STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And basically the STAR method is a structured way of responding to a behavioral-based interview question. So a behavioral-based question is going to be something that starts with a phrase like, tell me about a time when. So someone's looking for something that has actually happened in your past and they want to know how you responded to that situation. By discussing the specific situation, task, action, and result of the situation you're describing, you create a framework for telling your story. It's easier to remember stories. It's easier for you, and it's going to be easier actually for the interviewer to remember what you said. It also helps you stay on point. All right, so situation, that's when the interviewer wants you to present a recent challenge and situation in which you found yourself. Task is going to be, what were you required to achieve? The interviewer will be looking to see what you were trying to achieve from the situation and what needed to be done. The action is, what did you do? Describe your role in the situation. The interviewer is going to be looking for information on what you did, why you did it, and what the alternatives were. The result is, what was the outcome of your actions? What did you achieve through your actions, and did you meet your objectives? What did you learn from this experience, and what have you used in this learning since that time. We have a great article on the SciTechsperience blog. It's called Be Prepared for the Interview. Be sure to check that out. It's a great, shows some great examples of the STAR method and kind of what we're talking about. And of course, you can always Google it, right?
Yeah.
There are so many articles about the STAR method out there that provide great examples of this kind of storytelling.
Absolutely. You know, the STAR method is really an awesome strategy, and it's one of those that makes you very memorable to a recruiter. I spent 3 years as a recruiter, and some of the interviews that still stick out to me this day are times when they told me about their experience and used the STAR methodology.
Yeah.
But there are a few other best practices that I want to share before we get into the in-person interview.
All right.
So first of all, anticipate questions, practice answers, and just be prepared for the interview and make notes about what your answers to those questions are. We've put a link here with 150 of the most common job interview questions, no matter what the field. And I've personally used a ton of these when interviewing candidates, so these really are asked. And it's great to just kind of get a feel for the type of questions you might be.
That's a great idea to look those up in advance.
Yeah, and don't just look them up. Practice your answers, and especially for the phone interview, practice having 30 to 75-second answers. It's so hard to catch on those little non-verbals that interviewers might have when you're not looking at them in person.
Oh, good point.
So you don't know if you're rambling or if you're answering too short. So if you try to stick with the rule of thumb of 30 to 75 seconds per answer, you're really gonna try to minimize that sort of uncomfortableness and length there. Another thing when answering questions, always be honest. Please do not, go off on a tangent on something that you haven't done or try to exaggerate what you've done in a role. Recruiters, good recruiters, and other hiring managers are going to sniff this out, and it's one of the quickest ways to lose out on an opportunity.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. If you don't understand the question and you're kind of feeling you should do that, or if you'd like to get a better sense of what information they're looking for, just ask for a clarifying question. And if you're asked a question that you're not sure how to answer, you have a couple options to buy time. First, just say, that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a minute. That's perfectly okay to do. You can also pivot. You can say, I'm not sure how to answer that specific question, but here's what I do know about a related subject or a related piece of technology.
Oh, good idea.
Or you can just go very simple and ask them to repeat the question like you didn't hear. Again, buy yourself a few more seconds to think about it.
No, that's really great advice. Thanks for including that. Let's move on to the in-person interviewing. What does good preparation look like?
Well, basically to prep for an interview, there's a few things that you want to do. You want to make sure that you're ready for the interview and that you have done a ton of prep work. This will make you give a great impression and really set yourself apart. First of all, research the company, the position, and the person you're interviewing with.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so many people don't interview the person that you're interviewing with, but LinkedIn is a great tool for this. Go on LinkedIn and find, who you're interviewing with and see their career history, maybe how long they've been with a company, something to just prepare for. And then, make sure that you're preparing those questions in advance and that are based on your research. The questions are a great time to kind of highlight that you have done your research. And I always advocate for the term TCF, which stands for technical, cultural, and functional questions.
Great idea.
Technical refers to, especially in the STEM technologies,
Sure.
What sort of tech are you using? What sort of tools will I be working with? But also ask the cultural questions that, find out kind of what type of company it is, as well as the functional questions about, let the interviewer know that you're thinking about your actual day-to-day, where you'll be sitting, who you'll be reporting to, how long the commute is, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All right, it sounds like we have a question. Piper, what's the question?
So Matt B asks, when preparing these questions in advance, are there any topics that I should avoid asking or bringing up?
That's a great question, and there are a few. Basically, and correct me if you have a different opinion, Becky, but I think you should avoid compensation questions.
I agree, totally.
Yeah, at least for the first couple interviews, you should absolutely avoid that. You want these questions to highlight that you're thinking about the job and the responsibilities and how you fit, not about how much you'll be paid or how much PTO you'll have.
Right. So it's one thing if they bring it up, but you don't want to be the one to bring it up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So having let's think through the logistics. So you've done your preparation and now you're really kind of getting into that next stage of planning. What should we be thinking about here?
Absolutely. So when you're coming up on the interview, schedule the time and location on your calendar and include the company's name and the names and titles of those you're interviewing with, along with the phone numbers and email address for those people. You want to make sure that you map the route and know where you're going. Drive the route if you can. And know how long it takes to get there, and take in traffic and rush hour into effect, because the last thing you want to do is be late for an interview.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
I personally am overly cautious, and I actually print out a map and directions in case I can't get cell reception or my cell phone dies for some reason, though you should charge your phone before this just to make sure that doesn't happen.
I'm a big fan of having that printed map.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's old school, but it works.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. What are some other things that people can do to prepare?
Well, before you start driving there, decide what you're going to wear. Dress for success. And if you're anything like me and your formal interviewing suit or what have you has been sitting in the closet for 4 months, a couple days in advance, take it out, make sure it fits, make sure it's clean and unwrinkled, and that you're ready to go, and maybe get it dry cleaned if not.
Good point.
When you're dressing for the interview, especially in some of the STEM technologies, it's not necessary that you always dress in a full suit or the equivalent, but you should always overdress as opposed to underdressed. Err on the side of being overdressed. And if you're unsure, ask your recruiter what to wear there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for women, we do have another article on our website about what to wear to an interview. But for the women, you don't want to dress like you're going out for the evening. You don't want the long dangly earrings, really low cut blouses, really high skirts, have moderate heels. You want to dress professionally, but not like you're, trying to just be a knockout. That's not a good idea.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So another thing that I see, or a red flag that I saw as an interviewer, was smoking. Some people,
good point.
they get nervous for the interview, and that's how they calm themselves down, is having a cigarette right before they go in. Please do not do that. Wait until after the interview. There's no way to mask the smell on your breath or on your clothes, especially if you do it close to the interview.
Right.
Kind of along those lines, make sure you brush your teeth and make sure to take a shower. I mean, good hygiene is so important. Bring mints, just in case you get kind of that caffeine breath or something.
Yeah. All right. So you talked about smoking and brushing your teeth and stuff. Are there things in terms of like eating and drinking that you should avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. Limit your caffeine. If you're somebody who drinks caffeine every single day, please don't cut it out entirely and come to the interview all drowsy, but try to limit it, as well as sugary drinks. Try to stick with water and maybe even bring a bottle of water to the interview.
That's a great idea, because when you get nervous and your mouth gets dry, you want to have some water there ready to go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're not going to be impressing anybody hacking along while you cough. Again, on the food department, avoid garlic, onions, other stinky foods the night before, the meal before the interview. And kind of along that good hygiene route, it may seem obvious, but you really want to have it. Make sure you wear deodorant, but don't wear, excessive perfume or aftershave or cologne. It really kind of sends the wrong message to the interviewer.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now it's showtime, right? You've arrived at the company. What are you thinking about now?
Well, upon arrival, you definitely want to make sure you arrive about 10 to 15 minutes early. If you arrive any earlier than that, please don't go in like 30 minutes early. Just sit in your car if you're too early and study all your prep work. Showing up too early for an interview is almost as bad as showing up a little late. You definitely want to stick within, the first 10 to 15 minutes. When you're coming in, make sure you have the right material with you. Bring multiple copies of your resume on nice resume paper.
Time out. It looks like, Piper, do we have a question?
Yeah. Maya actually asks, in relation to that, She wants to know, would it be okay if I email the employer my resume ahead of time?
It is absolutely okay to email your resume ahead of time, but we still advocate bringing multiple copies of your resume printed on nice resume paper that you can pick up at Target or FedEx or
Yeah,
something.
and the reason you want to do that really is because it's possible that the employer has made some changes after the interview got scheduled, and now someone's sitting in for someone else, or an additional person has been brought in, and and people are just busy. To make it easy, you want to make it easy for these people to know who you are, know what you're about. So bring along those printed copies, even if you did send it in advance.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Along those lines, make sure that you bring in a pen and a notepad or something to write on. If you have a small folder that can hold a legal notepad as well as a couple copies of your resume, that's best. I definitely recommend that. And on that notepad, make sure that you have all of your questions written down that you prep for. A lot of people think that they can just kind of wing their questions when they get in there. That's great. Sure, go for that. Have some backup questions written down just in case.
Great advice.
In addition, make sure that you write down the names and titles of everyone that you're interviewing with. It's terrible to be 5-10 minutes into an interview and realize that you don't remember somebody's name.
Yeah, right. That's really great advice. So, okay, you've arrived, and now it's time to meet the boss. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, before you meet anybody, make sure your phone is on airplane mode or at least silent so you don't run into anybody there.
Yeah, good idea.
But as you're coming up to the boss or the recruiter, make sure you're making eye contact and smiling at them. And then when they get there, give them a firm but not a crushing handshake. You don't want to squeeze the life out of it, but you certainly don't want to be a limp noodle in their hand either.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. Another thing, again, keep smiling. It's going to put the interviewer at ease. It's okay if you're nervous. Try not to make it, an uncomfortable experience for everybody, though.
Right. Remember to breathe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So many people get nervous and they get tense. Their breathing goes fast. Just take nice, long, deep breaths. It'll help calm yourself down. And one of the things that's kind of corny to say is, visualize the meeting going well. Visualize yourself having success in the interview and feeling confident. It may sound a little cheesy, but it's going to help you in the long run.
Yeah, great point. All right, let's transition to the actual interview itself. So now they're asking you questions and you're answering them. What kinds of things do you want to keep in mind at this point?
Well, again, if they ask you questions that you're not expecting, use the STAR method to frame your response, as we talked about earlier. That's situation, task, action, result. Again, you should be prepared for a lot of these questions with all of your prep work, but make sure that you're ready for questions that you're not ready for too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And then also, the same things we talked about for first impressions apply to the real interview too. Make sure that you're continuing to smile where it's appropriate and continuing to maintain eye contact. Nothing's worse in an interviewer than somebody who seems grumpy and won't look at you.
Yeah, good point. All right. What other kinds of things should we be remembering here?
Well, the rules of thumb that we discussed back when we were discussing the phone interview apply to the in-person interview as well. A couple things to review there. When you're answering a question, try to keep it 30 to 75 seconds. You can be a little bit more liberal with this when you're talking with someone, just because you might have more of those nonverbal cues from the interviewer, but try to stick to that as a rule of thumb.
Looks like we have another question.
Zach asks, when I'm answering a question, is it okay to look up or refer to information on my phone?
Oh, that's a great question.
It is a great question. I personally would say no.
I would say absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned earlier, put your phone on airplane mode or silent. And if you don't know the answer to a question, either use the strategies we talked about earlier or say, I don't know the answer to that, but I could look it up, and here's how I would go about researching that.
Oh yeah, that's a great response. But yeah, I would say leave the phone, put it away.
Yeah.
Don't not pull it out.
Yeah, that would seem extremely rude to me as
Yeah.
an interviewer.
Rude
so.
and really distracting. I think it kind of takes you off your game, when you're answering questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I've seen it where they pull it out at the end to put something on their calendar for scheduling next steps, but other than that, it should really stay away.
Yeah, and even then, write it down on your notepad and put it on your calendar when you get out.
I always preferred that. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So, again, a couple other rules of thumb just to get back into this. When you're answering questions, always be honest. I know we've said this before, but you got to stay honest. The quickest way out the door is for the recruiter or hiring manager to realize that you're exaggerating or being dishonest about your experiences.
Yeah, people really they can tell.
Yeah, you can sniff it out. You kind of get a third sense about this, or sixth sense, I should say, about this. And so you're not fooling anybody most of the time. Again, if you don't understand the question, or if you'd like to get a better sense of what information they're looking for, ask a clarifying question, or say that's a really good question, let me think about it, or I'm not sure, but what I hear, here's what I do know. That sort of thing is always going to take you a lot further. And remember to ask questions, throughout the interview where it makes sense. So if they mention something or about the company or the position that piques your interest, those saved questions that you have, make sure to interject them. Make it a conversation. Don't have it just be question, answer. Make sure that you're kind of going back and forth. Make it a conversational interview.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing I would caution people on that is to, when you're following up on something that somebody said, is to not get drawn into going too far off track, because you want to remember that the interview this is your time and your time to shine, and you don't want to spend that time going off on tangents. Try to stay focused.
Absolutely, and that STAR method that you mentioned earlier is definitely going to help you do that.
Right. All right, so what should you be doing at the end of the interview? How should you be going about sort of wrapping things up?
Great question. This is actually something that very few people prepare for, is the end of the interview or kind of the last section. And it's one of the most important. It always baffles me that nobody preps for this. At the end of the interview, if they give you, at the end, they say, hey, do you have any questions? This is when you use the list of your questions. And make sure you note the responses. So many of my students, they think that they're going to remember it all when they leave, but after you leave, trust me, it's going to be a whirlwind to you. Note the responses so you have these answers. You don't want to ask the same question in the second interview that you did in the first.
Right.
Also, at the end of the interview, ask what the next steps are. So many people forget to do this, but you want to know what the next step is and when you can expect to hear from them, because this is going to help you later knowing when you should get back in contact with them. And it'll just set your mind at ease if you're waiting for 2 days when maybe they weren't planning to reach out to you for a week. Set yourself at ease. Let yourself know what the next steps are by asking that.
Yeah, that's great.
Also, make sure that you thank them for the opportunity for the interview while you're there, and make sure that you express your interest in continuing the process and for the role, and that you look forward to hearing from them in the future.
Yeah, good point. Piper, looks like we have another question.
We actually have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first one comes from Selena. She asks, if the employer inquires about salary requirements, how should I respond?
Oh, that's a really good question.
How
you want to take that one, Kip?
Sure. Yeah. That is a really good question, and certainly it's going to be different for every single individual. One of the main things that you want to do is try to turn the question around. You want, in the negotiation process, you want them to say a number first. If you're a STEM student that's going to graduate soon, or a student who's new to the industry, one of the best things to do is say, I'm new to this industry, and I've certainly done my research into what my market value is with the skills that I bring, but I'm curious to know what your range would be into whether those numbers are correct online. Just turn it around and try and see if they'll give you a range.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's a perfect response.
Yep. If they do press you for a range, though, and many of these recruiters and hiring managers are going to press you for something, aim a little high. Aim a little higher and give them a range. Don't just give them one straight number.
Yeah, good point. And what was the second question?
Second question comes from Hector. He asks, is it appropriate to mention if I'm interviewing with other companies as well?
Oh, yeah, that definitely could come up. I'd be honest. If you've got something else going on, I think it's okay to say that you are looking at some other options, but that this company would be your first choice and you look forward to, continuing the conversation.
Yeah, if you really have other opportunities going on and this is your first choice, be transparent, and don't do it in a pushy way that makes them think that you're trying to rush them. But if you just are honest with them about where you're at in your process, I personally used to always appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you don't want to say that you've got other things going if you really don't.
No, that's a quick way to bluff yourself out of a job. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. All right, well, let's talk about what to do after the interview.
So after the interview, it's really important to follow up with the thank you email after the interview. Some people prefer handwritten thank you notes, and I think that's fine, but an email is perfectly fine. We really think that you should send it, 1 business day after the interview, ideally in the morning so it doesn't get lost in their inbox. But that's far enough away that it'll kind of remind them about your interview.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, and this is a great chance to kind of set yourself apart. If the employer is interviewing a number of candidates that day, it's a good way to get them to remember you specifically and to think favorably on you. So in your thank you email, make sure you mention something specific that was unique about the actual interview that you were in, or something that will get them to remember who you are, so you can set yourself apart from the other candidates.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think you should probably reiterate your interest in the position and that you're looking forward to hearing from them soon.
Absolutely. And make sure you do that with everyone that you interviewed with. You might have had multiple interviews or a panel interview. Send an email to everybody. It's good form.
Yeah. Looks like we have another question, Piper.
Yes, a few more. Kelly wants to know, how long should I wait after the interview for a follow-up if I don't hear from them first?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, this goes back to at the end of your interview asking for next steps, because sometimes the company plans to reach out to you the next day, or it might not be for 2 weeks. And so that's why you want to ask when you can expect to hear from them. If it gets beyond that time and it's a day or two beyond when they said they'd contact you, absolutely get back in contact with them.
Does it matter if you call them or email them? Do you have a recommendation on that?
I personally prefer the phone. I don't think it matters terribly much, but most recruiters and hiring managers are getting a ton of emails every day.
Yeah, good point.
Might have better chance getting in touch with them over the phone.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. And did you say there was a second question?
Yes. Miguel asks, if interviewed with multiple people, who should I reach out to for follow-up?
Oh, you want to take that one, Kip?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of a tricky one, especially if you have multiple sections on the interview. I always like to follow up with the person who would be your direct manager. It's kind of presumptuous to go a level above them if you're interviewing with maybe like a C-level executive that you wouldn't be reporting to. But the hiring manager is who's going to have the ultimate say. So if you can get in contact with them, I would do that. But if it's expressly put out there that you should only be contacting the recruiter, sure, do that. That's just fine also.
All right, very good. Any other questions coming in? All right, if you have them, now would be the time to submit them. We'll wait just another second or so here. And while we're waiting, I would like to say that we have several other webinars that we have recorded, and we've got one on cover letters and one on etiquette for STEM resumes.
Yep. And also one on emails, or it's
right.
The same with cover letters, but
Yeah.
It's also on how to send professional emails.
Right, yeah. So check those out. Those are all going to be on the SciTechsperience website, on the blog page, if you look for student resources. So I guess we didn't have any other questions coming in. So I just want to say this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. And we really hope that people found this information to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you found this helpful, and I wish you all the best of luck on your job search.
All right. Yeah, thanks. This is great. So have a great day, everybody.